This story is titled, My Parents Abandoned Me in an Unknown Location for Their Amusement, challenging me to find my way back. But I never returned and instead spent 15 years crafting the ultimate revenge plan, while my phone constantly buzzed with their desperate attempts to reach me. Hey Reddit, I'm 24 years old, and until recently I had been working at my father Richard's hardware store. Like many young adults without better options, I was still living at home. College wasn't in the cards for me. My dad had convinced me that banks wouldn't give loans to people like me, whatever that was supposed to mean. My family situation wasn't exactly ideal. I have an older brother named Thomas, who has always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. It's not that we were poor exactly, but we definitely weren't the type of family taking vacations to Universal Studios either. We existed in that uncomfortable space between struggling and comfortable just enough to get by, but never enough to truly enjoy. One day, Richard announced we were taking a family road trip to Montana for my uncle's wedding. I should have known something was wrong right there. We weren't the road trip type of family, and my father wasn't exactly the spontaneous vacation planner. 3 days into this hellish journey, I was already regretting not making up some excuse to stay home. Richard and Thomas had been taking turns with their favorite pastime, making my life absolute hell. My mom, Clara, would occasionally say, "That's enough," in her weak, ineffectual voice, but everyone knew it was just for show. She never actually stopped anything. I need to explain a bit more about my family dynamic. Richard wasn't just your standard controlling dad. He was the type to wake you up at 4 a.m., screaming about some chore you'd forgotten to do. He would throw away my belongings if they happened to be in his way, and he'd been telling me I was worthless for as long as I could understand words. Thomas learned quickly that there were only two paths in our household: become dad's mini-me or become like me. Guess which path the little shit chose? That fateful morning, we stopped at some middle-of-nowhere rest area in Montana. There was nothing but fields and mountains for miles. Just this sad little bathroom building and some ancient vending machines. I'd been sleeping uncomfortably in the back of our Ford Explorer and needed to stretch my legs and use the bathroom. As I headed to the bathroom, I could hear Richard and Thomas laughing about something. Mom was checking her makeup in the rearview mirror, completely oblivious as usual. I remember exactly what I was wearing that day. A faded Led Zeppelin shirt, jeans with holes in both knees, and my beat-up Converse that I'd had since forever. I didn't take my phone with me because it was charging in the car. I didn't take my wallet either. Why would I? We were in the middle of nowhere, and I was just taking a quick leak. 15 minutes? That's how long I was in that bathroom. Maybe even less. When I walked out squinting in the bright Montana sun, the parking spot was empty. Our blue Explorer was gone. At first, I thought they had just moved the car, playing some stupid prank. I walked around the entire rest area, searching but found nothing. That's the thing about family betrayal. It hits different than any other kind. The realization that the people who are supposed to love you the most could do something so cruel is almost impossible to process. I waited an hour sitting on the curb, telling myself they were just trying to scare me, that they would be back any minute. People came and went, a few giving me weird looks. A trucker even asked if I was okay. I lied and said I was waiting for my girlfriend, who was in the bathroom. He nodded and left me alone. After 2 hours, I got that cold feeling in my gut. They weren't coming back. My first instinct was to borrow someone's phone and call them, to beg them to come get me. I was about to approach a mom with 2 kids when something stopped me. A lifetime of memories flashed through my head. Every humiliation. Every time they laughed at my expense. Every joke that was just cruelty with a punchline. I could almost hear Thomas's voice. "Dude, I bet he's crying right now." I could hear Richard's response. "He'll figure it out if he's not as stupid as he looks." And I could imagine Clara's weak protest that never changed anything. Right there, I made a decision. I approached that mom anyway and asked to use her phone. But I didn't call my family. Instead, I called information and got the number for the nearest shelter in Billings, about 45 miles away. I asked if she could possibly give me a ride into town, telling her my family had an emergency and had to leave but were sending someone later. She hesitated. I must have looked harmless enough because she eventually agreed. That first night at the shelter was a serious reality check. I had nothing but the clothes on my back. No ID, no money, no contacts. A shelter worker named Marcus let me use their computer. I thought about looking up my uncle's address from the wedding invitation I'd seen, thinking maybe I could get to the wedding and find my family there. But as I sat staring at the screen, I thought, why? Why chase after people who literally abandoned me? Who left me on the side of the road for laughs? Instead of trying to reunite with my so-called family, I created a new email account, looked up resources for emergency ID replacement, and Googled jobs that paid in cash. I needed to make a plan for myself. 2 days later, I was washing dishes at this small diner called Morning Glory. The owner was a 60-something woman named Rose, who had purple streaks in her gray hair and more tattoos than you'd expect from someone her age. I had wandered in asking if they needed help, explaining that my wallet had been stolen, but I desperately needed work. She sized me up for a minute before saying, "Dishwasher quit yesterday. You steal from me, you're dead. Start now." That's the thing about rock bottom. You can only go up from there. I worked doubles for a week straight, sleeping at the shelter and wearing donated clothes. Marcus at the shelter helped me start the process of getting replacement ID and contacted vital records in my home state. With my first cash earned, I bought a cheap pay-as-you-go phone from Target. 7 days after they abandoned me, my new phone rang. Unknown number. I answered it. It was Clara, her voice shaking as she asked where I was and if I was okay. She claimed they'd been looking everywhere for me, that it was just supposed to be a joke. According to her, they had waited down the road for 20 minutes, came back and couldn't find me. I listened to her panic and her fake concern. In the background, I could hear Richard telling her to tell me to stop being dramatic and get my ass to Uncle Stephen's. I could hear Thomas laughing. "Are you there? Say something," Clara pleaded. "We've been worried sick." The cold feeling in my gut was gone now. There was just clarity. "You wanted to see if I could make it on my own," I said, with the steadiest voice I've ever had with them. "So watch me." I hung up, blocked the number, and then blocked every family number I could remember. The next day, I went to the Verizon store and changed my number completely. Before changing it, I saw 27 missed calls. I imagined them getting more and more pissed as they realized their punching bag wasn't coming back. A month later, I had my own studio apartment. It was above a laundromat, tiny as hell, and smelled like fabric softener all the time. But it was mine. I worked my way up to prep cook at Morning Glory, with Rose teaching me how to properly chop vegetables without losing any fingers. Sometimes I would check my old email, the one my family knew. Messages piled up from Clara. "Please come home, we're sorry." From Richard. "This childish stunt needs to end now." From Thomas. "Dude, it was just a joke, stop being such a..." I never responded. Not once. That's the thing about freedom. Once you've tasted it, there's no going back to the cage. Look, I won't pretend it was easy. Some nights I'd scroll through Instagram and see pictures of people with normal families, families who actually loved each other, and feel this ache that nothing could fill. There were nights where loneliness felt like it would swallow me whole. Holidays were the worst. But every morning I'd wake up in my shitty little apartment that smelled like Downy, go to my dishwashing job where nobody called me worthless, and build my life one brick at a time. 3 months after they left me at that rest stop, I checked my email one last time. There was a new message from Clara. "Your grandmother is asking about you. Please just let us know you're alive." I closed the email, deleted the account, and threw my old SIM card in the dumpster behind Morning Glory. That night, Rose taught me how to make her famous cherry pie. She said I had good hands for pastry, the first genuine compliment I could remember getting in years. I never looked back. 5 years after being abandoned at that Montana rest stop, I found myself staring at a familiar face on my Facebook feed. Not because I was stalking my family's profiles. Okay, maybe I was. Thomas had been tagged in a local news article back home. He got a DUI and wrapped his car around a telephone pole. Nobody was hurt except the pole. The newspaper used his high school football photo where he looked so young and smug, nothing like the bloated mugshot underneath. That's the thing about karma. It moves at its own pace, but it never forgets an address. By then, I'd built something resembling a life in Montana. I had traded my crappy studio above the laundromat for a one-bedroom with actual windows and everything. I'd worked my way up from dishwasher to line cook, then to assistant manager at Morning Glory. Rose still ran the place with an iron fist and a flour-dusted glove. But she'd started treating me less like a charity case and more like a weird nephew or something. My first big purchase when I had savings was a decent laptop. Nothing fancy, just enough to take online classes through community college. I studied business management and basic accounting. The stuff Richard always said was for people who can't do real work. I spent my mornings at Morning Glory, afternoons studying, and evenings back at work. Rinse and repeat. Look, I won't pretend I wasn't still messed up from what happened. Trust issues? More like trust subscriptions that I could cancel anytime someone got too close. I made exactly 2 friends in those 5 years. My neighbor Oliver, who played bass in a terrible garage band and sometimes brought me homemade beer that tasted like hoppy dishwater, and Rose, if she counted as a friend and not just a boss. That changed when Lily started coming into Morning Glory every Tuesday and Thursday like clockwork. She always ordered the same thing, a Western omelet with no peppers and extra coffee, and always sat at the counter with a textbook. Med school, I later found out. She had this way of completely zoning out while studying, her fork halfway to her mouth for minutes at a time. I started timing her once. Her record was 7 minutes and 23 seconds before she realized she was holding cold eggs. It took 4 months of me bringing her coffee refills before she actually looked up and saw me. I mean, really saw me. Her eyes did this thing, widened just a little, and she said my name tag was spelled wrong. It wasn't, but it became our weird little joke. I'd wear a different wrong name every Tuesday and Thursday, she'd pointed out, and I'd act surprised. It was probably the stupidest flirting in human history, but somehow it worked. Our first date wasn't even supposed to be a date. Her study group had bailed on her at the last minute, but she already had a reservation at this pizza place that was impossible to get into. I happened to be wiping down the counter when she got the cancellation text. Next thing I knew, I was sitting across from her at Giuseppe's, both of us awkwardly realizing this looked exactly like a date. 6 months later, she moved into my apartment. A year after that, we got a slightly bigger place together. Nothing fancy, just a 2-bedroom with a bathroom where the toilet didn't run constantly and neighbors who didn't practice bass solos at 2 a.m. Meanwhile, I kept tabs on my family through fake accounts. I'm not proud of it, but there it is. Richard's hardware store had started struggling after some big chain opened on the edge of town. I saw him ranting about it on community Facebook pages, his posts getting increasingly desperate and bitter. Clara's social media had become this weird shrine to family, with constant throwback pictures of us all smiling and posts about missing her boys, plural, which was Rich. She'd tag Thomas but never mention me, like I'd been erased. Thomas bounced from job to job, with lots of vague posting about haters and new opportunities, the classic social media smokescreen of someone whose life is circling the drain. 3 years in, Rose took me aside during inventory. She told me she was thinking about opening a second location on the other side of town and asked if I'd be interested in running it. Not owning, just running, an important distinction. I didn't sleep that night, kept thinking it was some kind of test or joke. People like me don't get opportunities like that. Richard had made sure I understood that much. That's the thing about poisonous beliefs. They stay in your system long after you've escaped the snake. But I said yes, because Lily, half asleep beside me, mumbled that I'd be stupid not to. Because Oliver, through a haze of weed smoke when I mentioned it, said, duh, you practically run the original place already. Because Rose isn't Richard, isn't my family, and has never once made me feel worthless. Morning Glory East opened 6 months later. It was smaller than the original, with a different menu, my menu. I worked 90-hour weeks that first year, lost 10 pounds I couldn't afford to lose, fought with Lily about never being home, and came home to passive-aggressive sticky notes on the fridge more than once. But it worked. People came, and more importantly, people came back. The food was good, the vibe was good. We weren't getting rich, but we were making it. 4 years after being abandoned, I was making enough to help Lily with her med school loans. Not all of them, those things are monstrous, but enough to make a dent. She cried when I showed her the payment confirmation. Not movie crying with perfect mascara, but real crying, snotty, red-faced, hiccuping crying. I never felt more like a real person than in that moment. Then my grandmother died. I found out through Facebook. Clara had posted this long, dramatic tribute with 1 million heart emojis. Grandma Helen had been the only one in the family who ever stood up to Richard, the only one who seemed to see me. She used to slip me $20 bills when no one was looking and tell me to save it for my escape. I think she meant college, but it turns out it was more literal than that. I thought about going to the funeral. I even looked up flights. Lily said she'd come with me, hold my hand through the whole awful reunion. Oliver offered his crappy hatchback if I wanted to drive instead. Rose just shrugged and said, "Dead people don't know if you're there or not. Do what brings you peace." I didn't go. Instead, I sent flowers, a generic sympathy arrangement. I signed the card with just my name. No return address, no note. The explosion on social media was immediate. Clara posting about signs and reaching out from beyond. Thomas making cryptic comments about prodigal sons, Richard saying nothing publicly, but I could imagine the storm behind closed doors. A week later, I got a friend request from a profile I didn't recognize. Some random name, no posts, no friends. I almost deleted it until I saw the message. "It's Uncle Steven. Your mom gave me your old email, but it bounced back. Are you okay? We've been worried. Your dad has been asking around about you." I blocked the account. That night, I had my first panic attack in 2 years, sitting on the bathroom floor at 3 a.m., trying not to wake Lily, feeling like my lungs were collapsing. I kept imagining Richard hunting me down, showing up at Morning Glory, destroying everything I'd built. Lily found me there an hour later. She didn't ask questions, just sat with me, her shoulder touching mine. When I could finally breathe again, she said the simplest thing. "They can't take anything from you that you don't give them." The next morning, I called a lawyer and got advice on restraining orders, just in case. I tightened privacy settings on everything and asked Rose to alert the staff not to give out information about me to anyone. Practical steps: control what you can control. 5 years to the day after being abandoned, I married Lily. We had a small ceremony at the state park. Oliver was my best man, and Rose made the cake, crying through the whole thing, mascara running down her wrinkled cheeks. Lily's large, loud family adopted me instantly. Her dad making dad jokes that somehow didn't make me flinch. Her mom hugging me without setting off alarm bells in my head. That's the thing about family. Sometimes it finds you when you've stopped looking. A week after the wedding, I was scrolling through my dummy account late at night when I saw it. A post from Richard on a community page looking for information on my son. Last known location, Billings, Montana. He claimed it was a family emergency. There was no emergency. I knew that much. What I didn't know was why, after 5 years of nothing, they were suddenly looking for me. So I dug deeper. I created another fake account, joined community groups from my hometown, and pieced it together bit by bit. The hardware store had closed. Their house was in foreclosure. Clara had some vague medical issues she was posting about. Thomas had moved back home after his 3rd DUI. They weren't looking for me because they missed me. They were looking for me because they needed something. And you know what? For the first time in 5 years, I smiled when I thought about them. Not because I was happy about their misfortune, but because I realized something important. I didn't care anymore. I closed my laptop, crawled into bed next to my sleeping wife, and made a decision. I would keep watching from a distance, not out of hate, not out of love, but because sometimes the best revenge isn't what you do. It's what you build while they're busy destroying themselves. It started with a LinkedIn notification 15 years after being abandoned at that Montana rest stop. My carefully constructed life had a glitch. Someone had viewed my profile 27 times in one day. That's not unusual for recruiters to do weird stuff like that, but what was unusual was the name. Thomas Matthew, my brother. That's the thing about the past, it's patient. It will wait in the tall grass for years before it strikes. By then, my life looked nothing like that first year. Lily had finished med school, done her residency, and now worked at a local clinic 3 days a week so she could be home with our kids more. We had 2, Nathan, 7, and Lucy, 4. The apartment above the laundromat was long gone. Now we had a modest 4-bedroom on the outskirts of town. Nothing fancy, but it had a yard where the kids could play, and I could grow tomatoes that never quite turned out right. Morning Glory had expanded to 3 locations. Still not some massive franchise, but enough that I didn't have to work the line anymore, except when someone called in sick. Rose had semi-retired 2 years earlier, though she still showed up unannounced to criticize the way we made her pie crust recipe. I'd made peace with my past, or so I thought. I still kept tabs on my family from a distance, but the constant checking had faded to maybe once every few months. Last I knew, Richard and Clara had moved to a smaller place after losing the house. Thomas had gotten married, divorced, then married again. They'd all seemingly moved on with their lives, as I had with mine. The LinkedIn thing rattled me, though. 15 years of silence, and now this. I mentioned it to Lily as we were doing our regular Sunday night thing, folding laundry while half watching whatever Netflix show we were behind on. She paused, a mismatched sock in each hand, and asked if I was okay. I nodded, because what else could I say? That I was suddenly 24 years old again, stranded at that rest stop? That I could feel Richard's voice in my head, calling me worthless? 3 days later, I was at Morning Glory East, the original second location, helping with inventory because the supplier had sent the wrong kind of coffee filters again. Jennifer at the front called back to let me know there was some family asking for me. My first thought was that it was Lily's parents. They sometimes surprised us when they were passing through. I headed out front, my mental gears already shifting, thinking about how to convince them to stay for dinner. It wasn't Lily's family. Richard looked older, grayer, his formerly imposing frame somehow shrunken. Clara's face had that pinched look that comes from years of worry, her hair dyed an unnatural shade of brown. And Thomas? Thomas looked like Richard had at 40, with the same stance, the same way of taking up space. There was a woman with them I didn't recognize, young, maybe early 20s, hanging back like she wasn't sure she belonged. In that moment, nobody spoke. The lunch rush noise seemed to fade away until all I could hear was my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. Richard broke first, saying my name like a question. I nodded, because my voice had apparently gone on vacation. Look, I'd imagined this moment 1,000 different ways over those 15 years. In some versions, I told them off spectacularly. In others, I was cool and distant, unbothered by their existence. In a few embarrassing late-night scenarios, we even had a tearful reconciliation. Reality is always messier than imagination. I gestured to an empty table in the corner, told Jennifer to bring waters, and sat down across from the people who had once been my family. And waited. They'd found me through a magazine article. Mountain Life Rising, 10 local success stories. It wasn't even a big feature, just a sidebar with a photo of me in front of the original Morning Glory location. But apparently, one of Clara's friends from high school had moved to Montana, seen it, and sent it to her with, "Isn't this your son?" Clara mentioned that they'd made 107 missed calls to my old number over the years before it was disconnected. She had kept count. She mentioned this like it was supposed to mean something. They talked over each other. Clara about how worried they'd been. Richard about how I'd misunderstood what happened that day. Thomas awkwardly trying to act like we were old buddies catching up. The young woman, Thomas's second wife Katie, just watched me with curious eyes. I let them talk. I watched them spin their version of reality where they weren't the villains. I noticed how Richard kept eyeing the restaurant, mentally calculating what it might be worth. I saw how Clara's hand trembled slightly when she reached for her water. I caught Thomas's practiced charm slipping whenever he thought I wasn't looking directly at him. Finally, when they ran out of steam, I asked the only question that mattered. Why now? That's when the real story came out, in bits and pieces between awkward silences. Richard had medical bills from heart problems, with no insurance. Their second house was being foreclosed on too. Thomas's business venture, something vague involving cryptocurrency, had failed spectacularly. Clara needed knee surgery she couldn't afford. They weren't there for reconciliation. They were there for money. I should have been angry. I should have thrown them out. Instead, I felt something unexpected. Pity. They looked so small, so desperate. These giants who had once controlled my whole world were just flawed, broken people. I invited them to dinner at my house that night. I said I needed to think, to talk to Lily. They agreed eagerly, Richard already halfway to considering it a done deal. That afternoon was surreal. I picked Nathan up from his karate class, helped Lucy with her preschool show-and-tell preparation, all while texting Lily updates about who was coming to dinner. She offered to take the kids to her sister's, but I said no. I wanted them there. I wanted my family to meet my family. Dinner was lasagna, my specialty that wasn't really special, just a recipe from the back of the Barilla box that I'd tweaked over the years. Nathan set the table without being asked, carefully placing forks on the wrong side until Lily quietly corrected him. Lucy insisted on wearing her unicorn costume because it was Tuesday, and apparently Tuesday was now Unicorn Day. When the doorbell rang, I almost dropped the dish I was carrying to the table. Lily squeezed my arm as she passed, whispered that she had my back, no matter what. The kids looked up curiously, sensing something important was happening. That's the thing about moments you've dreaded. When they finally arrive, they're simultaneously worse and better than you imagined. Introductions were awkward. Richard kept calling Lily Laura, despite corrections. Clara couldn't stop crying whenever she looked at the kids, which was freaking Lucy out. Thomas and Katie were the least awful, making actual efforts at normal conversation, though Thomas kept dropping hints about family helping family. After dinner, Lily took the kids upstairs for baths and bedtime, giving me a look that clearly said, "Text if you need extraction." Then it was just me and them, sitting in the living room that suddenly felt too small. Richard started in on the pitch, how family sticks together, how he'd always known I'd make something of myself, a lie, how they just needed a little help to get back on their feet. $20,000, just a loan, of course. I let him finish. Then I asked him if he remembered what he'd said to me on my 18th birthday. He looked blank. I reminded him, "At least you can't disappoint me anymore, once you're not legally my problem." I asked Clara if she remembered what she did when Richard threw my acceptance letter to community college in the trash. Nothing. She'd done nothing. I asked Thomas if he remembered telling my first girlfriend I was probably gay anyway, when she came to the house looking for me. They squirmed, made excuses. Richard started to get that dangerous edge to his voice that used to make me shrink. But here's the thing, I wasn't shrinking anymore. I was 15 years and a million miles from that person. I went to my office, came back with an envelope, and handed it to Richard. Inside was a check for $73.50. Richard looked at it, confused, and asked what the hell this was supposed to be. I told him, in 2010, that was exactly what a Greyhound ticket from Billings to our hometown would have cost. The exact amount it would have taken for me to make it back home from where they abandoned me. The silence was absolute. Then Richard started shouting. He called me ungrateful, selfish. He said I'd always been a disappointment, the greatest hits album of my childhood playing one last time. I didn't argue. I didn't shout back. I just stood up and told them it was time to leave. Clara tried a different approach, tears, guilt, asking how could I do this to family. Thomas went cold. The mask of friendly brother completely dropped. Katie just looked embarrassed for all of them. When they finally left, Richard crumpling the check and throwing it on our front step, I closed the door and leaned against it, my legs suddenly shaky. Lily came downstairs and asked if I was okay. I nodded, not trusting my voice. We cleaned up the dinner dishes in silence, checked on our sleeping kids, and got ready for bed like it was any other night. As I was setting the security system, I pulled up the front door camera on my phone. They were still in the driveway, arguing. Richard was gesturing wildly, Clara was crying, and Thomas was looking at our house with an expression I recognized too well. Envy mixed with hatred. Finally, they got in their rental car and drove away. I've never seen or heard from them again. I don't expect to. That chapter is closed. That's the thing about revenge. The best kind isn't something you do. It's something you live. Every happy moment with my kids, every inside joke with Lily, every quiet Sunday morning with nothing to fear, every single ordinary day in a life built on my terms. I never made it back home. I did something better. I built one.